Hello fantasy managers and welcome back to another video from myself, Will, and fantasyfootballhub.co.uk. In this video we're going to be going over 10 tips for a successful FPL season. Now as you can see, this is my FPL season history. I'm pretty proud of it, 6 top 10k finishes, 3 inside the top 1000 with a best rank of 82nd there. As you can also see, I had an absolute stinker last season. I think that was primarily because I didn't stick to these principles. So I'm going to be following these principles very, very closely this season, and I would recommend that you do as well. Make sure that you watch through the whole video and let me know which of these 10 you most agree with. Maybe also let me know if I've missed any important tips out. As always, if you do enjoy the video, please hit the like button and also subscribe if you're not already, because it really does help the channel out. It encourages me to do more videos like this. And I've got a lot more content coming out over the next few weeks and indeed over the season. Let's get into it. Okay, so the first tip, I've kind of rolled two into one here, but I think they're both important and wanted to get them both out early. Firstly, don't pay too much attention to last week's points. And, I see this as the biggest mistake that beginners certainly make. If somebody, say Kante went and scored 2 goals in the first game, his previous season history has said that he's not really a good FPL pick. He's not likely to get braces every game week, but you can guarantee that his ownership would soar and everybody would be bringing him in and thinking, he's the next Lionel Messi. Last week's points, don't get me wrong, they do have an influence. What we'll come to later, though, is that other factors are far, far more important to predict future points. And at the end of the day, we care about future points potential in FPL, not past points, because you care about how many points the player is going to score in your team next week. You don't really care about how many points they've scored last week. And the other thing is ownership is not something that I look at particularly strongly. Look, I know some managers do take notice of ownership, and I think it can be important in certain situations. But, if there is a low-owned player, which I think is a good pick, I see that as an opportunity to really jump on them and go for them. Similarly, if there's a high-owned player, which I don't think is a good pick, then I see that as an opportunity as well. So I don't really take too much notice of ownership. If there's a high-owned player, which I think is a good pick, then I'll definitely get them in. I'm not going to be stubborn and just not get a player in because they're highly owned. Okay, so tip number 2 is target players that have multiple point sources. And what I mean by that is, Trent Alexander-Arnold is a good example of this. He can get goals, he can get assists, he can get bonus points, and of course he can churn out those clean sheets as part of a rock-solid Liverpool defence. So for me, he's a player that's good value and can get multiple sources of points. In the same way, you've got to look out for players that are on free kicks or on corners. Trent Alexander is another example of a player that is on free kicks and corners. The other one, of course, is penalties, another very, very important source of points. It's not rocket science, but obviously, you've got to target the penalty takers from teams that get penalties, the likes of Liverpool and Manchester United, that have got fast-running winners. Good at picking up fouls, getting a lot of penalties. You want the player that is going to take that penalty. So, Bruno Fernandes, example for Manchester United, Mo Salah, example from Liverpool. These players are just going to churn out points each and every game week just because they're on set pieces, they're on penalties, and they've got multiple sources of scoring points. Okay, tip number 3, a little bit of a beginner one again. Be very careful with point hits. I think this is a surefire way to absolutely crush your rank. If you're taking 4, 8, even 12 point hits every single week, then you're just not going to do very well at the game. I think there are opportunities where there are very, very good reasons to take point hits, and I myself take a fair amount of point hits, but they're well thought through, and you've got to really weigh up the pros and cons of those point hits and really think about the cost benefit analysis. It's not rocket science, but you've got to be really, really careful with point hits. And for example, just bringing in the player that scored the most points last game week for a -4, you think, well, they scored 12 points last game week, a -4 is going to be, I'm going to get that back next week because they're going to score another 12 points. It doesn't quite work like that. As I said, we're concerned about future point potential and not past points. As I'll come to later, do they have good fixtures? Do they have good stats? These are the things which you've got to be thinking, is that player actually worth a -4? You've also got to really think about the player that you're sacrificing. You bought that player in for a reason, for a set amount of time. So is it worth getting rid of that player? Do they still have good upcoming fixtures? Do they still have good stats? So be really, really careful with points hits. Okay, tip number 4 is pay close attention to fixtures. And this is the absolute bread and butter of a fantasy football manager. You need to know what teams have good upcoming fixtures and target players from those teams. It's fairly straightforward, but the amount of people that I see don't do it. And again, you don't want to bring in the player that scored 12 points last game week and then plays against City and Liverpool in the upcoming 2 fixtures, because they're just not going to score the same amount of points. So you've got to really pay close attention to fixtures. Obviously, there are exceptions. When Man City lost to Norwich last season, I loaded up on Man City players. But over the course of the season, if you keep backing a player and a team that have good fixtures, then you're going to be on the right side of those odds. So for me, fixtures are absolutely crucial. Okay, tip number 5 is hold on to your chips. Now, if you're not familiar with chips, I pause the screen and give those a read. You've got 3 chips plus your wild card. For me, I think you've got to hold on to those chips for the second half of the season and wait for the blank and double game weeks. Again, if you're not sure what blank and double game weeks are, subscribe to the channel and I will explain a lot more when it comes around to that. But needs to say, hold on to your chips for the second half of the season, because that's when they can be most powerful. I'm actually a big believer playing the first wildcard fairly early, but I think this season is a little bit of an exception. We're expecting some big blank and double game weeks around game week 18, 19, and we have to play our first wildcard before game week 16. So I'm potentially going to wait until game week 16 to play my wildcard so I can set myself up for the blanks and doubles around game week 18, 19. That will allow me to save my other wildcards. You get 2 wildcards during the season, obviously, for the end of the season where there are going to be more blanks and doubles. So being really conservative and, saving your wildcards, saving your chips, I would say is, absolutely crucial. It's a little bit of a tortoise and hare situation where, you're going to have some of your mini league rivals are going to slam all their chips within the first few game weeks, and they're going to be ahead of you in that mini league. But if you hold on to your chips and play the long game, I guarantee you'll probably overtake those mini league rivals towards the end of the season, which is when it matters, which is when the cash leagues pay out, which is when you get those bragging rights. Tip number 6 is pay close attention to stats, and again, you can get these on the FPL website. Looking at things like shots in the box. But if you want to go the extra mile, really have a flexible tool that allows you to have a look at all the key stats, expected data as well. Change by price, change by game week range, change by per appearance, per start. All of these crucial filters which allow you to find out those golden nuggets and those golden players which really shoot you up the mini league. Then I recommend using our Fantasy Football Hub Opta Stats tool. Now, I know some managers prefer the eye test and just looking at match of the day. For me personally, I'm not going to be able to watch all 10 games of a game week, so having a look at the stats, having a look at the high level match of the day, whatever it is, using a combination of the stats and the eye test, that's how I like to play. Now, I think that most good managers these days do have a pretty good understanding of stats and how it applies to fantasy football. At the end of the day, it's a numbers game. And while I think eye test is very, very important, if you see a player just absolutely smashing it, playing through their skin, usually that's reflected in the stats, but not always. And I think there are situations where, eye test is very, very important. But I do think that paying close attention to stats is absolutely crucial. Okay, tip number 7 is knowing how to time your transfer and building team value. Now, read a good article on Fantasy Football Hub about 10 golden rules of building team value. I'll leave a link in the description to that, which goes into a lot more detail about exactly the strategies you should go through. But needless to say, early season, you want to try and build your team value. If you get to the end of the season and, you've got 107 team value, which is very achievable, by the way, and you're looking at your mini league rival and they've only got 99 million, that's a huge difference in the ability that it gives your team in terms of bringing in new players, the flexibility that it gives. There's so many advantages, and this is one thing that I got wrong last season. I didn't build my team value early, and I'm definitely going to be focusing on trying to build that team value. And in the opening sort of 5-6 game weeks, that's when you can get most rises in your team value. Obviously, the primary thing here is selecting good picks, and that should come first and foremost. But if you can select good picks and build team value, and often making a transfer early during the game week, I think is is really is sometimes a risk, but often that risk has rewards. There's a good site, again, I'll leave a link in the description, which they predict what price rises are going to happen. And so you can go on there, you can see, is the player that I'm looking to bring in, is their price likely to increase? If it is, then you think, well, maybe I'll do that now rather than the end of the week. You'll gain maybe zero point 0.3 in value, and that 0.3 doesn't seem like a lot, but over the course of a few game weeks, when you make several transfers, that 0.3 can turn into a couple of million, and suddenly you can afford that extra premium player rather than that mid-price player. Okay, tip number 8 is learn from the best. Now, there are some managers on Twitter that are very, very good, multiple top 10k finishes, lots of them contributing to the hub, doing their team reveals, but you can get their advice on Twitter as well. So go and drop these guys a follow. There are other ones on Twitter which there are a lot which I can't mention them all in this video, but needless to say, if you look around on Twitter, then you'll find some really good managers to follow, and you can not copy what they do. That I would never recommend that, but you can look at how they make transfers, the strategy that they use in terms of making a transfer, the structuring of their team around different player price points. So I'd recommend that you drop them a follow and listen to what they say when they've got a certain player pick. Obviously, you've got to trust your own gut, trust your own instincts, do your own research, come up with your own ideas. But having said that, I do think that these guys offer some invaluable advice. Okay, so tip number 9 is have a plan. You look at this guy here, Magnus Carlsen, world chess champion. He was top of the world in FPL for a couple of periods last season. So, he's part genius, this guy, but he's obviously a very, very strategic thinker, and he thinks over the long term, and he has a plan. Again, going back to, you don't want to just transfer in the player that scores the most points last game week. It's about future points potential, and having a plan, planning your transfers in and out is absolutely crucial to doing well in Fantasy Premier League. Obviously, you need to be flexible, and those plans can change. But, thinking strategically, thinking over the long term rather than the short term, looking at teams that have good fixtures, not for just the upcoming game week, but for the upcoming 5-6 game weeks, looking at the underlying numbers and thinking, what players are going to do well against what opposition, really beginning to strategize over what players have the best value and when I can bring those players in, when is a good time to move certain players out. Doing that is so crucial in FPL. We've got a few planners on site like Ben Crellin's planning sheet, which it's not for everyone. If you're not into your Google Sheets, then it might not be for you. You can use pen and pencil. But if you are, if you like your Google Sheets or whatever it is, then I'd recommend trying that one out as well. Okay, tip number 10 is a shameless plug for Fantasy Football Hub membership. You get 25% off for preseason discount. Leave a link in the description and in the information card above. You get access to everything you could possibly need to dominate your FPL mini league. 5k WhatsApp league, access to all of our stats, all of our tools, our fixture ticker, player comparison tool. That thing is so useful. Access to our WhatsApp groups. We're getting incredible feedback from that. Really popular resource. You get to interact with lots of other FPL managers. Some of them are very, very good. Similar with our Slack channel, a little bit of a bigger forum and it's a really good way for the whole community to interact. We've got a brand new points prediction tool coming in the pipeline as well. That thing is going to be really cool for, if you want to have a look at who is expected to score the most points over the upcoming game weeks. That thing's going to be absolutely crucial as well. So tip number 10 is become a Fantasy Football Hub member. As I said, link in the description and in the information card above. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please consider liking, please consider subscribing if you aren't already. Bye for now.